you, and don't take offense to this. Are you crazy?
No, I'm not crazy.
Many people think you are.
I'm sure they do. And I think the problem is because fans want to believe in professional sports and they want to believe in their leagues. But if they really examine them, they should realize that they're lying to you. And that's why I wrote the book, is because I got tired of being lied to by these professional sports leagues, because they present themselves as being like the protectors of the game. But in reality, they're not protecting the game for altruistic reasons. They're protecting the game because they're monstrous businesses. They're billion-dollar-a-year industries, and they want you to buy what they're selling.
Before we get into all of that, Brian, I want to ask you this. As of this moment, are you a sports fan?
No, not anymore.
You're not a sports fan anymore, so this taint, this conspiracy that you've delved into, it's really put you off all games.
Yeah, I have a really hard time watching them anymore. I do watch, basically because now it's almost become my job. Because I'm almost like a watchdog against these leagues. But yeah, I mean, I can't really sit there and enjoy, a football game or a basketball game like I used to anymore, because I watch them with a different viewpoint.
Well, let me throw out some names at you. You tell me what they have in common, okay? Will Chamberlain, Charles Barkley, Michael Jordan, Isaiah Thomas, Jaromir Jagr, Jeremy Roenick, Rick Tocchet, Ty Cobb, and of course, Pete Rose.
They all had gambling issues.
Pete Rose, should he be in the Hall of Fame, real quick?
No.
What's the big deal if a Pete Rose bets on his own team to win? What's the big deal if the goalie for the Dallas Stars, who was that again? Marco Turco. What's the big deal if he bets $5 on whether or not his team's going to win? Why is that an issue? Isn't he just confident?
I think what it is gambling hits at the integrity of sports. Because if you know that an athlete is gambling, even if he's supposedly gambling upon himself, I think in the back of everybody's mind, you start wondering, well, what else is he gambling on? Is he really only just gambling on himself every time, or is there something else going on? And then you have to realize, of course, unfortunately for a lot of bettors, is that sports gambling across the nation is illegal for the most part. So then you have to understand that he's dealing with likely a bookie, and then the bookie somehow probably connected to organized crime. And then, like in the case of Pete Rose, when Pete Rose didn't bet on the Reds, which happened several times, then the bookie had an instant tip. Well, if Rose isn't betting on the Reds tonight, I think I should be betting on the other side. So, I mean, it leads to other problems and other questions, and it basically comes down to really how much integrity is involved here.
Is there a difference, and if so, can you outline it for me? Is there a difference between manipulating sports for gambling purposes, as you just mentioned, as opposed to creating better storylines vis-a-vis ratings where the networks might try to manipulate a game so they've got a Game 7, for instance?
Well, there is a difference, because if it's doing it in a gambling perspective, there's the law. There's the Sports Bribery Act, just passed in 1964, and that makes it illegal basically for myself, for example, if I were to pay a player to fix a game, that's against the law. But if a league, for example, told a referee, like in the case of Tim Donaghy, or at least what Donaghy claims, if a league told the referee, say, hey, don't call fouls on this guy, give these guys a little more leeway, call it tighter against that team, basically manipulate, fix the game the way the league wants it, that's not against the law. And that's a big difference. It's illegal on the gambling side. It's not illegal on the corporate business side of the league. So, I mean, there's two aspects to this, this subject matter, but the interesting thing is one's illegal and one's not. The leagues can fix their own games. They can manipulate them all they want because they're entertainment, and there's no law protecting that.
Like professional wrestling, for instance. I mean, basically you're saying that when the league does that, the NBA, Major League Baseball, the NHL, NFL, whatever, if they're doing that, it really puts down their sport to the level of WWE.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is the WWE, you can bet on that in Europe.
Are you kidding me?
No. So, I mean, when people say, well, you can't bet on WWE, it's, purely just, entertainment, it's an act, it's the show, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what, you can bet on it in other countries. You can't bet it here in the United States, but you can in other countries, so they don't seem to care. So if the same thing is happening in the NBA, if it's happening in the NFL, big deal. I mean, you don't know the results. 50% of the people, if the bookmakers are doing their job right, are going to be wrong anyway, betting the wrong side, so what's the big deal?
Are you saying that there are these backroom meetings where league officials come down and talk to the refs and say, hey, it would be really good if the New York Rangers met up with the LA Kings in a cup final? Wouldn't that be good for ratings? Can you guys make sure that you call that hooking penalty with 30 seconds left? Are you saying that happens?
Yeah, and basically I am. But I think the interesting thing is it doesn't have to be that overt. I think if referees have been around long enough, and again, Tim Donaghy in the NBA kind of spelled this out, is that the referees just kind of got the message. They understood without having to be told. And a lot of times it would be done in subtle ways. They would, because they have to review game films of themselves and review game films of other referees, and they get, directives from the league about, hey, look out for these sort of calls, that sort of call, make sure you call those, make sure maybe you let those go. It's done in a subtle way, but it's definitely being manipulated because, like you've mentioned, we've seen it many times where you're watching any sport and you hear the commentator say, hey, they're really letting them play out there. Well, how is that possible? If you have a league rule book and you have these rules stipulated that if a player does this, that's a foul and this should happen, why isn't it being called? It's not that it's being missed. You can see referees sometimes looking directly at certain plays, and they're not calling it. So why? And that's the thing, that if they're not calling it here and then they're enforcing it there, why is this happening? And the interesting thing for me with the Coyotes is that they were, a terrible team when they were the Winnipeg Jets, when they were originally Coyotes. They never got in the playoffs. Then all of a sudden they have no ownership. And then suddenly they start making the playoffs over and over and over again in the past couple of years. And this year they're doing really good. They look like they're on the run to do something. The team gets bought, officially bought, so it's no longer in the NHL's control, and immediately they lose to the Kings and are out of the playoffs. I think they bolstered up the Coyotes to get an owner because the NHL didn't want to own them anymore, and once they did that, they just let them drop and go back to being the way they are.
Is it true that you attended a card collectible show just to ask Joe Namath if Super Bowl III was fixed?
Yeah, I did. I wanted to get his autograph just to talk to him.
And what did he say? Did you get anywhere with him?
He just kind of smiled and looked at me, and he goes, I made that guarantee because I thought we were the better team. But then again, if it was fixed, likely Namath wouldn't know about it. And I think that's one of the other things where people say, well, everybody would know about this and, everybody would be involved in it. No. If you're going to fix a boxing match, for example, you only tell one of the fighters go down. You don't tell the fighter that's going to win, hey, you're going to win tonight. Because then it just becomes a big play-acting, pantomime thing. In the case of football, you don't necessarily want the winning team to know because then they're going to act differently. If they're playing really hard and real tough because they think, the game is winner or losable, then, they do what they're supposed to do. It's just you have to get somebody on their team to lay down.
All right, this might sound weird, but I like darts. I like to watch darts on TV. Big in England, of course. And over there, they have a thing called the Premier League. They're getting 10,000 spectators out a night for this Premier League where it's the top 8 dart players in the world. Now, that is an individual sport. It's very precise. They're throwing from 8 feet away. They've got to hit a triple 20, which is really the size of a cigarette butt. So they're deadly when they've got darts in their hand. And I've often wondered, because there's certainly sports betting. All the bookies in England, the Ladbrokes, things like that, they take these bets on these dart matches. And I've often wondered, how hard would it be to get to one of these players to say, oh, I'm going to miss that double 16 or the double 20 at the very most crucial time? How hard would it be to get to an individual in sports to say, hey, listen, can you just miss? You'll get paid money. I'll win money because I'm laying the bet against the other guy. That happens more often than we'd like to think, doesn't it?
I think it happens all the time. And I think there's a lot of ways you can get to people. I mean, you look at organized crime, and they've built a legacy on knowing people's weak spots. And I think the leagues can do the same thing. I think gamblers can do the same things. And I think even, professional athletes can be flat out greedy.
Okay, let me ask you this, Brian. Let me ask you this. Break down the example for us, and let's do it 2 ways. First of all, let's talk about how the league or a league gets to a player. Then let's talk about how an organized crime boss or a professional gambler that has thugs at his side gets to a player.
Well, the league with drug testing, they control the entirety of drug testing. They determine what's illegal. They determine when tests are held. They collect the results. They test the results. And then it's up to them to make the results public or not. So they control everything. And I think it would be very easy for whoever, take an athlete, say Peyton Manning. Say, Peyton Manning, you tested positive for cocaine. We know this. Okay, we got the proof here. We got the test. So what do you want to do? Do you want to have this made public? Do you want to be, labeled a cocaine addict and go through all the rigmarole that's attached to it? Or maybe would you perhaps want to do a little favor for us? And I think it's that easy. I think because all this stuff is kept secretive within the league, because they are private business, they can do what they want behind closed doors. They don't have to make everything public to the fans. It's very easy for them to do this. And I think they can do this on, various levels. I mean, they can find out, again, like organized crime. Organized crime can get to people because they can find out, for example, what if a player happens to be homosexual? I mean, you can't find a current professional athlete who is admittedly out as a homosexual. So say he gets in a gym, they get, incriminating pictures of this guy. It'd be very easy to approach him and say, hey, look at this. Do you want this on the front page of the New York Times? Or, maybe do a little favor for us. And I think it's the same way, too. Athletes, I'm sure, gamble. And that's one of the things I find bizarre is that you can look at all the different crimes athletes have committed, DUIs, assault and battery, weapons charges, all these different things that they get in trouble with the law for. And then you can find all these other things that they get suspended by the leagues for, but no one ever gets in trouble for gambling. And that makes absolutely no sense. Because if you look at what makes a potential gambler, especially an addicted gambler, those character traits are almost identical to what makes a professional athlete. So who's to say that these athletes aren't out there gambling, get in trouble with their illegal bookie, who are often, again, connected to organized crime, they can't pay off, and then they have to do a favor for the organized crime member and fix the game.
John Daly, Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, okay? John Daly's made putts for major golf titles. He's faced those situations. He's experienced that thrill. Michael Jordan's done the dunk for the World Championship. He's made that three-pointer when it counts. Charles Barkley the same. He's been in those tough playoff contests. They are thrill seekers, you might say, and they've experienced that. Why is it, do you think, these guys get involved in sports gambling or Vegas gambling?
I think it's a thrill-seeking aspect. I think it's part of that A-type personality. I mean, what makes anybody get to professional sports gambling or, professional poker playing or into, something that's so based on chance to make a living on? I think there is a thrill factor involved. And I think, again, when you have somebody like Michael Jordan, who really, throughout his career, even before he got into professional basketball, when he was a college player, he had gambling problems. I mean, he had those tendencies to want to bet on games of horse.
He retired, and the rest of the world thinks that he retired because he wanted to go play some baseball, wanted to try to make it big in baseball. Why did he retire, according to you?
I believe he didn't really retire. I believe he was approached by the league and Commissioner Stern to step away because it was coming out that he had a serious gambling problem. I mean, it was known that he was losing literally millions of dollars on the golf course to golf hustlers, one of which happened to be a cocaine dealer, and that as this story started to grow in stature, they started to look further and further into what Jordan was doing. The NBA was like, whoa, we don't want you to become Pete Rose here. We don't want our star athlete, and a guy who was not just the NBA, but he was like McDonald's and Chevrolet and all these major corporations. They didn't want to lose that money. So it was very easy for them to say, hey, look, you step away from the game, go seek some treatment. We'll make sure all the rest of this goes away because you'll be out of the limelight, and then you can come back and everything will be cool. And I think that's exactly what happened. Because as soon as Jordan retired, the NBA dropped its supposed investigation of him, and it seemed like everybody else in the sports media dropped their investigation of him as well, and it all did go away.
Do you believe the lifelong sports gambler, the guy that's made a living and a pretty good living at betting on sports, the guys like Billy Walters, Lem Bankers, those guys, do you think they had these tips? Do you think it's part of their job to find out, hey, who's going to throw the game, which guys are going to miss that free throw, that sort of thing? Is that all part of getting the edge?
Oh, I think that's entirely about it. I mean, I think that's what put him above everybody else. Because I've talked to Lem Baker. I interviewed him for this next book I'm working on. And he used to hang out with Lefty Rosenthal, who was one of his best friends. And Lefty was known as a massive game fixer back in the 50s and 60s. I mean, that's what he did before he came to Las Vegas and built the sports book at the Stardust. He was fixing games, and he had all the inside information on these guys. He knew which athletes were out there partying late at night. He knew which ones had drug problems, who had gambling problems, women problems. He knew all that stuff. And I think Billy Walters is another guy who has a series of informants who give him this sort of information. Because James Batista, the guy who was working with Donaghy, who's also another huge sports gambler, in the book Gaming the Game, which was written about him and kind of by him, he talks too about how he used to get information from sports journalists, guys who were also betting on games, and get inside information from them, get inside information from team physicians.
And those big-time gamblers, those big-time high rollers, they're not doing anything wrong. I mean, they're just getting an edge.
Yeah, exactly. And there's, like you said, there's nothing wrong with that. But the ultimate edge, in my opinion, is if you know a game is fixed. And that is the ultimate inside information, that you know somebody's not going to perform their best because they're intentionally not performing their best. And I think it's also these big-time sports gamblers who could be the ones who are directing some of these fixes. Because, again, with James Batista working with Donaghy, he knew what Donaghy was doing, and he was making literally millions of dollars off of him because he knew Donaghy was basically fixing games.
What's the greatest fix in sports history?
I think it's Super Bowl III.
Tell us why.
Because I believe that the Colts and Bubba Smith, who played on that Colts team, publicly questioned whether that game was legitimate or not, and he played on the losing side.
I mean, that's a game that really made the NFL.
Well, exactly. And I think as a business decision, having the Jets win, which was an AFL team, because a lot of NFL fans outnumbered AFL fans about 3-1 in the country at the time. They didn't think the AFL was really a legitimate league and deserved to be in, the prominent NFL. That game, by having the Jets beat the Colts, who were one of the greatest NFL teams in history, even today, one of the greatest teams that ever played NFL football, and the Jets won that game. It legitimized the AFL. It made the merger a lot more possible, and it made billions of dollars for the owners. And as a business decision, the best business decision would be to have the Jets win that game at all costs.
Quick story. When I was about 16, I went back into my closet. I had a locked container, a file with all my hockey cards. I had about 9-10 Wayne Gretzky rookies, mint condition, and all of a sudden it was gone. Well, I came to realize that my mom sold them in a garage sale like 10 years earlier. Anyway, I'm a card collector, or at least I was. What is the card collecting con? Can you outline that for us?
I think one of the things with collecting cards, and I did it for years. I mean, actually, when I was 1 month old, my Christmas gift was a pack of 1972 football cards. There's like a picture of me under the Christmas tree with as a baby with 1972 football cards there. So, I mean, it's something that I've been doing forever. And as I got older, same thing with professional sports. The more I realized I didn't trust these leagues and believe in them, I didn't necessarily trust the card companies either. And I did some investigating, and I mean, one of the things is a lot of people go by the price guide for how much cards are worth. Well, the biggest card dealers in the country control the price guide. They're the ones who, like Beckett refers to, who set the prices. So are these guys really going to limit the prices of their cards because they're going to be limiting their own net value? Because when you sell a card on eBay, if you try to put like a $100 card on eBay, sometimes you're lucky to get $20 for it. So is it really a $100 card or is it a $20 card? Well, these guys, the guys who own all the cards, who set the prices, say it's a $100 card, but you can't sell it for that. So there's some question there. And then on the, company side, for example, the big thing became like jersey cards, the insert cards, little pieces of team jerseys in them. Well, I asked, which nobody else seemed to do, I went around and asked all the NFL teams and the Major League Baseball teams and the NBA teams, for example, how many jerseys do you give players a year? Well, surprisingly, they only give teams or players 2 jerseys. A home jersey and a away jersey. And if they get damaged beyond repair, then sometimes they get an extra jersey. But for the most part, every player only gets 2 jerseys, and they're allowed to decide what to do with them. Sometimes the teams keep them, sometimes the players keep them. But there's not that many actually game-worn jerseys out there, yet somehow there's this mass proliferation of game-worn jersey cards. Well, where did all these jerseys come from? Well, I asked some of the card companies, and they said, well, we get some of the jerseys directly from the teams, but we also get them from respected dealers. Well, all right, if you get them from respected dealers, how many of them are counterfeiting jerseys?
Right.
I can go buy an authentic jersey that's exactly like the one Peyton Manning wears on the field right now. And then I can scuff it up, put a couple little features in there, and say, hey, look, it's a game-worn Peyton Manning jersey. Who's going to know the difference? Card companies don't care because they need this stuff to make the cards. So again, you have to, unfortunately, you have to question a lot of this.
It all comes down to money. Brian, I don't know if I should be talking to you because I do enjoy sports. I mean, I'm on the edge of my seat when it's a tie game and there's 3-4 minutes left, when it's coming down to crunch time. When did all of this go wrong for you, and what was the cause of it? I mean, there you are, a sports fan probably your entire life, and now, just talking to you, I can tell you're so skeptical, and you probably got legitimate reasons to be skeptical. But where did it change for you? What was the leading cause of that?
There was probably 2 things. One was 2 books I read. One was called They Call It a Game by Bernie Parrish, who used to be an NFL player for the Browns in the 60s. And then the other one was I read a book pretty much around the same time called Interference, which was written by a guy named Dan Moldea. And he wrote a book about how basically organized crime influences professional football, and he cataloged about 70 different NFL games that have likely been fixed. Now, the NFL claims they've never had a game fixed in its history, but here now is this guy, an investigative journalist, said, here, 70 games that got fixed. I started watching these football games and other sports, and I kept seeing results that were almost too coincidental to be true. I mean, you see little just oddities that happen within sports where certain teams, these Cinderella stories come out of nowhere, and they win the championships, and I realized, well, with the NFL, when they share 80% of all their revenue as a league, when one team succeeds over and above what they should, everybody in the league profits from it. So then you started seeing things like, the Patriots win after 9/11, which is just kind of an oddity. You see the Saints win after Hurricane Katrina, kind of an oddity, but yet it's benefiting the league. So I started asking, well, could there be more to it than just pure coincidence? Could they actually be making these business decisions and pushing these teams further than they should be and profiting from what happens?
What does Brian Tuohy think because it really is, sports really is part of the social fabric. In Canada, hockey's a religion. And I know across America, Major League Baseball is the national pastime. NFL football's really like church on Sundays. The NBA is so popular nowadays. What does it make you think when you see everyone at the office on Monday morning talking about, did you see that game on Sunday? How about that shot? What did you think about that call? Does it just make you sort of smile and nod because these guys are right into it and you're thinking that there's so much more going on than they could ever realize?
Most people don't talk to me about this anymore anyway. I don't hear any of those things. I find it bizarre that, I have a Facebook page and people will, post on there, for example, yeah, did you see what happened in the NBA last night? I can't believe they made those calls and blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking, why are you watching the game? if you keep complaining about, God, the officials are screwing this team and they're taking it away from that team and they're giving it to LeBron James, well, then why are you watching? If you know what's going to happen, if you understand that maybe this is kind of all manipulated and designed to make more money and get, more people watching and have higher TV ratings, which generates more ad revenue and et cetera, well, turn it off. There are things you can do.
By the way, before I give you a plug on the website and the book, who's the one guy you'd like to talk to? The one guy you need to answer a question that perhaps you haven't talked to yet. Is there a guy out there?
I'd probably like to talk to Billy Walters.
One of the all-time, for people that don't know Billy Walters, he's one of the all-time legendary, he's a high roller. He is a multi-millionaire gambler, is he not?
As far as I know, he is, yeah.
Yeah, he's one of the big guys. He's a high roller, folks. Why would you want to talk to him?
Because I think he'd be the type of guy who would know a whole lot more than a lot of people. I think he's the guy, if he's been making this much money and doing this much sports gambling, he knows about games that have been fixed in the past. The thing is, of course, I doubt he would admit to it. That's the hard part with all of this. I've done a lot of investigating. I've called a lot of people. I've tried to contact a lot of people. And not everyone will talk to me because a lot of times I say, hey, I want to talk about game fixing. And they're like, I don't know about that. And there's even a lot of times I want to talk about how sports gambling really works, how these, mega sports gamblers make their picks and come up with their information and that sort of thing. And I've even had some of them respond to me, not willing to be interviewed, but respond to me and say, there are certain things I just don't want to reveal. It's not that I want to learn this information because I want to go out and bet on sports. I don't care. I don't have the bankroll. I don't have the time. I don't have the inclination to really be a sports gambler. I just want to learn this information because I want to know what's really going on. I don't want to be lied to anymore. I want to know the truth about what's happening. Because supposedly sports gamblers and the casinos and the bookmakers are kind of the watchdog for fixed games. But the more I've investigated this, the more I've come to realize that they're not, watchdogging anything. If anything, when they see some sort of oddity, when they see some sort of trend that looks like it might be fixed games, they tend to jump on board and piggyback it and bet it, as opposed to, run into the feds and say, hey, I think these games have been fixed.
How much money is bet on NFL football on a Sunday, for instance? You got any ballpark figure?
Well, I've heard illegally at least $1 billion a week on the NFL.
Wow.
And I've heard one estimate, and this goes back, I think it was 1999, the federal government did kind of a survey of illegal sports betting, and they estimated anywhere between $80 billion and $380 billion is wagered illegally on sports in a year.
Wow. It all comes down to the money, and if it's that much money, folks, you got to believe that somewhere, somehow, somewhere along the line that someone has, called that foul, someone has threatened that player, someone has done this or that to fix a game. The website is www.thefixisin.net, and the book is called The Fix Is In. Brian Tuohy, thanks a lot for your time. Real quick, what will people find in the book and on the website?
Well, the book is basically all the ways the sports leagues are lying to you. And it's all a lot of the games I think they've manipulated intentionally to get higher ratings and create better storylines. And the website goes even further, and it gets into stuff that came after the book, and it comes into stuff that, is just more of the fringe element as opposed to the stuff I can, more readily prove. Because the book is 95% fact. It's just my conclusions that add up to the other 5%.
Brian Tuohy, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.